Hi everyone, Nick Washburn here. This is a third video in a series about creating a VM-based Azure Stack HCI test lab. In the previous video, we provisioned VMs, and now in this video, I'm going to apply OS updates and install Windows Admin Center into our environment. After that, our test lab will be ready to create an HCI cluster to do networking and storage and all of that, and that'll be in the next video. So make sure you follow these videos in order for that all to make sense. You can go to my website here, get the whole list of posts and videos so you can follow along. Alright, so where we left off, the VMs were created and they are now ready for us to start using. So in this part, or in this part of the tutorial, I deviated a bit, so I'm gonna go step by step through the tutorial and then point out which steps I skipped or did differently. Okay, so just looking at the Microsoft's tutorial, at this part in the tutorial, we are installing operating system updates and software. So the first thing they have you do here is apply some OS updates. So they want us to update the domain controller at this point. I actually want to just update all of my VMs. It's just going to be easier to go through all of them and do that all at once. So just going through here, I'm going to show you here here's Hyper-V Manager. You can see my VMs. So I'm going to just start those up, get those running, and then I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here. So once those are up and running and I connect to one, then we can just kind of go through and I can give you an idea of what steps I'm going to do. So let's skip ahead to where I can connect to one of the nodes. Alright, so I've connected up to one of my Azure Stack HCI nodes. You can see here I have the virtual machine connection open. I've got it logged in with my test my lab account, and I've got the sconfig here, and I'm just going to go in and two things here. I'm going to apply my feature updates first, make sure we get all of the latest there. I want to get 22H2 installed, and then after that I'm going to go back in and install any quality updates. So let's search for those feature updates, apply them, and then I'll skip ahead. We can look at quality updates. Okay, so feature update has been applied. So now I've rebooted this node, and I'm going to go back in, search for quality updates, see what I can find. Hopefully not much, but anything that's come out after 22H2 was released, and then go ahead and install those updates. Okay, while that's going on, I'm going to go back and take a look at one of my Windows Server VMs. So I'm going to do the domain controller last, just because I don't want it to impact any of the other servers running in the domain. So let's first connect up to the management server. Get that loaded, and you can see here, I'm just going to basically open up Windows Update and just search for and apply all the updates. And I'm just going to keep doing this, applying, rebooting, and checking until there's nothing left to install. So I'm just going to skip ahead to the end here. Okay, so I've installed all the updates that there are, and my VM looks good as far as OS updates. So I'm gonna I also need to do this, make sure I've done this for all of my VMs. I'm not going to show you the rest of that, but essentially we have two other VMs that we need to update, basically do the same steps. So the other Azure Stack HCI node, need to also install the feature and quality updates. And then when we're all done with that, the domain controller, we're going to go back in and pretty much do the same thing I did here. Just keep applying the Windows updates until they're all installed. Alright, let's skip to the end of that. Alright, so back on Microsoft's tutorial, the next step here is they want us to install Microsoft Edge on the domain controller. So there are a couple things here that I didn't do, and I'll explain both of them. So first thing, I didn't need to install Microsoft Edge on the domain controller because I'm using Windows Server 2022. So when this tutorial was written, 2019 was the latest Windows Server version available, and 2019 did not come with Microsoft Edge by default. So that's why they have the step of installing Microsoft Edge. So the second thing is the reason why they are installing Edge on the domain controller in this tutorial is because they're going to use that as essentially the GUI management machine. And they have one other management server in this test lab, but it's a Windows Server core machine. So they're installing Windows Admin Center in gateway mode on a core machine, and then connecting to that management server from the domain controller. So that was just overly complicated for me. I didn't want to go through the steps of installing Windows Admin Center and Windows Server Core. I just didn't need that, and I didn't need to use the domain controller as my management GUI. So instead, what I did is I just put together a Windows Server 2022 management server that has the desktop experience, and then I just installed Windows Admin Center directly on there. So I'm going to show you what those steps looked like here. So I've got my management server, basically my only other Windows server that I have other than the domain controller, and it's got the full desktop experience instead of in the guide where they were using Server Core. And then I'm basically just going to install Admin Center, just click, 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 right? So I'm going to just go to the link to get the latest copy, and then do all the defaults during this installer. So I'll just skip to the end of that install. Alright, so now I've got Windows Admin Center installed on my management server, and I can just use it directly from here, right? I don't need to find another GUI machine to connect to this Windows Admin Center instance. I can just use it directly from the management server. So that's great. That's going to make it simpler on the next step, or the next steps. Okay, so as far as the next steps in the tutorial, if we go back and look at that, this next step about adding an externally accessible network adapter. So they're suggesting this if you want to essentially connect to your test lab from anywhere else on your network. So let's say you just wanted to connect to Windows Admin Center from your laptop or from any other machine. If you added this externally accessible network adapter to your management server, then you could do that. I didn't need to do that. That was just an extra step that just added some complexity I didn't need. So I skipped that step. Okay, continuing on in the guide here. So now they're having us install operating system updates. Well, I did that earlier, so I just did this step a little bit out of order. So since we did this, we can just move on. All right, so the next step, I did do this just as specified in the guide. So just kind of through a quirk of how the cluster creation process goes, we need to have enabled the Hyper-V role ahead of time, according to the tutorial guide here, for that cluster creation process to work right. So there's just a script here that they have provided for us, this preview workaround PowerShell script. And if you just grab that, you bring that down to your test lab, save a copy, and then you do need to go in and edit your node names to match your node names. So I used the same node names as they have as the default here, so I didn't need to do much. Just needed to change the number of nodes because I only have 2 nodes in mine, and then now we can run the script, and the script is just going to go through and add the Hyper-V role or enable it. And if this didn't work for you, or you just didn't want to do it this way, you can also just go in and enable the Hyper-V role yourself manually. But let's follow the script. So going through here, we have that script now. So when I run the script, it's going to ask me for my lab username and password. It's going to use that to connect to the nodes. And then get that going. You can see it's just going to go through, rebooting, and then it's going to add the essentially then add the features. So I'll skip to the end, but it's basically going to go through each of these and do a number of reboots, install feature on each node. So let's skip to the end. All right, so we got to the end of that script, so we're finished there. And then the last thing they have us do here before the end of the tutorial is register Windows Admin Center with Azure. I didn't do that yet. It isn't necessary until later in the process, so I just skipped this registration step for now. All right, so we've come to the end of the tutorial here. So then in the next video and in the next steps, we're going to proceed to the cluster creation wizard, and that's where we're going to set up our cluster, basically turn our Azure Stack HCI nodes into a cluster, and set up the cluster networking, set up the storage, and really get us ready to do any of the next steps we want to do, any of the next testing we want to do on our cluster. So I hope this was useful, just walking through this tutorial to set up a lab, a completely virtual self-contained lab using Microsoft's process here. I hope you follow along in my next posts and next videos, and I hope to see you again. Okay, thanks, bye.